Ngā mihi nui nui, ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou, ngā mihi mahana ki te whānau a WITI.
Kia ora, kia ora Sue.
E kia ora ki ngā kai whakahaere o tēnei hui. It's a pleasure and an enormous privilege today to share the stage with our beloved WITI IHIMAERA.
Me too, Sue.
The man who has gifted Aotearoa so much of its best literature. His novels are our taonga, as are his many short stories and edited anthologies. I'm not going to list these works, nor, I'm sorry, WITI, list all your awards and accolades. To do so would be to chew up most of our 45 minutes. But in 2017, most recently, he received the Chevalier des Arts et Lettres from the French government, and in the same year he was awarded our own Prime Minister's Award for Fiction. Last year he was the Writer of Honour in that other little book festival that takes place in Auckland. And I want to take this moment, WITI, on behalf of all your readers, to say thank you yet again for your lifelong dedication in writing our stories. They may have started life as yours, but we proudly claim them as our own. In 2015, the first volume of WITI's memoirs, Māori Boy, won the general non-fiction section of the Auckland New Zealand Book Awards. Today sees the much anticipated arrival of Volume 2, Native Son. It picks up where Māori Boy left off and stares down with a brutal, honest eye the turbulent, confusing and exhilarating years between 1959, when the 15-year-old WITI was sitting school cert, and 1971, when as newlyweds he and Jane Cleghorn set sail for their European honeymoon. We'll launch this new volume in style later on, here at 5:30. Please do stick around and buy the book. But for now, I'll ask you all to give a warm welcome to WITI. So WITI, how about we start with a reading?
Okay, Sue. Well, kia ora Sue. Te wahine whakahaere o tēnei mahi tēnā koe. Nā mihi ki ngā iwi o te kauerawa maki ko te waonui tīriwa. Mai te kore ki ngā tai a rauka tauda, nā reira tēnā koutou. Ki tēnei whare tēnā koe, ki ngā paipai o Going West, mai titirangi, tēnā koutou. Kui mā koro mā family mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tāta katoa. So I'm going to read from a piece. I actually saw Murray Gray outside. Murray and I were at Gisborne Boys High together. And so this piece is about being at Gisborne Boys High. And as soon as I saw him, I thought, oh my God, this piece involves his father. So his father was called Jigger Gray to us, you know, in the lower fifth. So I said to him, well, you know, Murray, would you mind if I read this piece? And he said, well, you know, if you see some tomatoes flying to you from the audience, that'll be me. So you better duck down here. And with all of the pieces that involve going back into childhood, Sue, I go from third person or first person into second person. So all of the pieces are written as if you are me. So you have taken 5 years to get through primary school, and you have been through 2 high schools before your mother and your father tell you that you had better enroll in Gisborne Boys High School and get your university entrance. So you are sitting there in the truck with them, and the month is February and the year is 1962. And the future pivots as Mum and Dad drive you to Gisborne Boys High School where you are to enrol. If they had not persevered with you, your life might have been entirely different. Other cars have gone through the entrance to the sunlit buildings beyond. Parked in the leafy shade, you sit silently in the cab of the truck between Mum and Dad. That way they can make sure you won't do a runner. Then Mum looks at her watch and then at your father. Well, Dad, we can't sit around all day. In you go. Dad gets out and you join him. Mum stays in the truck. You walk through the sunlight to the headmaster's office. There are a number of other parents waiting with their sons. Dad gives the secretary your school records from your previous school, the church college. One by one, the other parents go in, and most return with relieved smiles. Sonny boy is in. Half an hour later, it's your turn. The secretary takes in your documents. 5 minutes later, she looks at Dad. Mr. Gray will see you now, Mr. Smiler. Mr. Gray is an imposing man. He always wears his academic gown, surely a garment to intimidate the bravest heart. And he suffers no falls. Dad is wearing a snappy fedora which he takes off as you both enter, and the headmaster gets straight to the point. I have read the reports from your son's previous school, he begins, and he showed good grades there. However, given the school's teaching methods, I have to evaluate the reporting criteria as well as your son's reports. And it was an American church school, wasn't it? I'm afraid I can't take a positive view. He gets up to shake Dad's hand goodbye. This is the kiss-off. Dad refuses to budge from his seat or rise to shake Mr. Gray's hand. A New Zealand education is the right of every child, Dad says. The college recommended him for an American university, but Witi decided to stay in New Zealand. He needs his UE, a New Zealand qualification, to go to Victoria. Victoria? Dad was jumping the gun. Mr. Gray is taken aback. Did he think this ejection of a parent was going to be easy? Your son is not a child, Jigger Gray reminds Dad. He is 17, and if I admit him to the lower sixth, he will be joining pupils who are mostly 16. Show me, Dad says, in the education regulations where an age limit is set for pupils entering sixth form. He is bluffing. Mr. Gray's eyebrows arch, but he must admire Dad's attempt to finesse him. And there are, in fact, 2 others your age in 6B2 that year. But he's firm. He's not a man whose decisions are questioned. And he goes to the door and tells the secretary to send the next parent and son in. As you and Dad pass him by, he says, I suggest, Mr. Smiler, that you take your child, home to the farm and put an axe in his hands. He's had his chance. You walk back to the truck. Dad reports to Mum, well, dear, the headmaster won't admit Witi. Your mother is made of sterner stuff. You go right back in there, Tom. We are not leaving until Witi is enrolled. You return to Mr. Gray's office. Tell Mr. Gray that I am back, Dad advises the secretary. The headmaster has many other parents to see, she explains. We will wait. Inspired by Mum's obstinance, Dad is fired up. And the morning turns into a long procession of parents and pupils coming to see the headmaster. And Dad overhears the secretary whispering to one of them, we have a very stubborn parent here, and he will not take no for an answer. At midday, 3 hours since you got here, Mr. Gray appears at the door and is going to lunch, and he is clearly furious with you and Dad. He marches past and disappears. Maybe we could go and get some lunch too, Dad? You ask your father. Better not, Dad answers. Your mother would not be happy if we left our post. I look out the window at her where she sits in the truck, her arms folded. She makes a sign. If you value your lives, you stay there. I sit down beside Dad again, bugger. Lunch over, Jigger Gray returns. He goes into his room and shuts the door behind him. And then, just as quickly, he returns. He is clearly only managing to keep his temper under control. Then he lifts his hands in a sign of capitulation. All right, Mr. Smiler, I will allow your son to enroll. And he looks you straight in the eye. And I'll be keeping my eye on you, young Smiler. And after the first term, we'll ask your teachers to give me a progress report. If you are not doing well or slacking, and give me good reason to reverse my decision, and I hope you do, your feet won't hit the ground until you are on the street. He turns to Dad. Do we understand each other, Mr. Smiler? Dad shakes on the deal. Then good day to you, Mr. Gray says. With that, you and your father join Mum. Don't let the headmaster prove me wrong, Witty, Mum says.
Well, Witty, you weren't a slacker then, and you haven't been a slacker either in the 5 years since Māori Boy was published. There have been 2 edited anthologies, a novella, your 4th opera, and just filling in those otherwise empty days, a television documentary produced. How was it coming back to memoir and such intensely personal memories after 5 years?
Well, some people know that one of my favourite sayings is one from Anne Landers, who was an American newspaper columnist, and she said that things always get darkest before they become totally blank. And writing a memoir is so different to writing the novel, because in the novel you can actually play pretend, and even if you are the person in the middle of the book, you can make yourself into a hero,
Yeah.
which is really good when you're writing a novel. So in the memoir, though, you can't hide from yourself, and you can't hide from other people. Well, I asked the New Zealand poet Vincent O'Sullivan why he wasn't writing a memoir, and he said to me that I'm not sure if I like the fella that I'd be writing about. So a lot of the memoirs about that, self-flagellation. You wonder, well, does it whine me? You go, do I really have to do this? Why am I doing it? And so there is that flagellation. You actually spend a lot of time hiding under the blankets, or at least I do, wondering whether or not it is time to get up yet, and if I do get up, will I have the strength and the will to actually put the pen onto the paper? And, well, it's like living your life again. And I've done it twice now. How stupid can you be? So there's that, and then of course, this is why I look like this instead of that photograph on the front cover. It looks like the kind of photo you'd put on a dating site. However, I must say I look better than the Beeb or the Beaver. I think you should move over, Tom, and eat your heart out, Brad. But Harriet, my publisher who's sitting over here, and is the one who's entirely responsible, she was on to me in my running away and my doing other things, and she would always remind me that I had signed up to do Native Son, and where was it?
Well, I know there's no hiding from Harriet. One of the things I love about Native Son and Māori Boy was that these books are so much more than a straight memoir. Witty weaves Māori stories, legends, in and out through his own story. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about your decision to frame your stories, not just as a straight recalling of your own memories, but to include Māori legend as well?
Yeah, okay. So when I actually started out in this process, I had to do a lot of karakia. So I would go around the house going whakarongo ki te tangi a te mane nei, or I'd go ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kākā, hoping that all of the gods of Māoridom would come and help me, with this book. And a lot of sprinkling of water, because in the Ringatu faith and in other Māori customs, you sprinkle yourself with a lot of water. So if you turned up at my house too early in the morning, you would have found me coming to the door looking rather bedraggled, like a wet rat. So there's a lot of that. There's also a lot of what Māori call putting yourself on the ara, or on the pathway. So in particular by remembering the whakapapa of a career. And I'm sure that we all do this. We think back on why it was that we started becoming writers. And for me, there's a young boy who was 15, looked something like that boy on the cover. And he was going to Tekaraka District High School. A teacher told the class to read a particular book. And in that book there was a short story, and it was supposed to be about the Māori, but it was so poisonous that I threw the book out the window and got caned for it. But it taught me a lesson, and it was a lesson that the African writer Chinua Achebe had learned some years before, and that is that although fiction is undoubtedly fictitious, it can also be true or false. And so I reflected on that for a little while and realised that as a boy I made a vow when I was 15 that I would write a book. That book did become Pounamu, and I would put it before in front of every schoolboy and girl in New Zealand. And ever since, all of my books have been kind of antidotes, which I am administering to that very, very first short story that I read. And I think for most of us who are writers, we then try to establish the kaupapa of the book, and that is its purpose. So for me, every time I start a book, and it was the same with Native Son, I had to really focus on what its purpose would be, and also then its tikanga. What method was I going to bring to it? And so that meant not bringing a European narratorial method to it, but a Māori method of the kind that you're thinking of. And you, Sue, and Al, and some of the other writers in the audience will agree that every time you start a new book, it's actually back to the beginning again. It's actually back to basics. It's actually back to first principles that you always apply to your work. And so some of my first principles are: who will narrate it? What will the book be about? Why am I writing it? Where will it set? When will it be set? And the most difficult question of all is, how are you going to write it? You know, either in first person, third person. Most books are never written in second person. But I felt that this one, which was full of conversations, I would try second person as well. How would I achieve the lift-off for the book? How would I sustain it along the great big beam of the book? And what kind of techniques would I be able to deploy to get it through Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5, you know, the kind of evolving nature of the text. And how could I ensure the unseen text, or the text that exists beneath the words? Because when readers read the work, they read the words, but in my opinion, that's only about 1/3 of the book. You know, the 2/3 of the book is all of the unseen or psychic text that supports the words. And that psychic text, in my case, comes from being Māori, and it's the sort of like 2/3 of the iceberg that is keeping the 1/3 of the scene text above. I had to figure out how deep I would go with this book. I'd already gone deep enough with Māori Boy when I talked about my rape as a child, and this one I knew I had to go deeper. But it's an interesting issue for writers, because we have families. We're not just Al, the writer. We're not just you, the writer. We're not just Elizabeth, the writer. We have families, and we have grandchildren. And so for me too, it was a matter of talking to them and saying, well, Ben, who's only 6, Ben, Papa is writing this book. It's called Native Son. Ben, you may not understand this now, but it is about Papa self-harming himself and about trying to commit suicide, Ben. So Ben is just playing with his games and everything. But it was important for me to start talking to him then, because I believe that if you have a writer in your family, you must allow them to write what they write. And the family does need to have the grace and the understanding and forgiveness to allow the writer to therefore write the condition of the family, or the condition of the whānau, or the condition in any way he or she wishes. Because, you know, it is really a kōrero. I'm probably, in around about 5 or 6 years' time, I'm hoping that Ben will come to me and say, why did you do it, Papa? Because that is the nature of our work. How would I answer to the past? In what way would I be able to answer to my ancestors? And I'm not just talking about the Māori ancestors, but the New Zealand ancestors, because now Ben and Aria and James, my grandchildren, they had 2 wonderful inventories of culture. How would I answer to that past? So that then meant not just writing in a Māori way, but also for them, for whatever creatures they're going to be in the future. How am I going to answer to the present, to you all, and can I justify myself to you? And of course, how am I going to answer to the future? And because you and I are writers, it's also how am I going to answer to the language? And this was a very, very important question for me to address, because C.K. Stead always said that the writer's imperative is to answer to the language, to make sure that the language that the writer deploys is of the highest quality. So for you and I, it was also about making sure that this was a book that had a high discourse. It wasn't going to be a middle discourse. It wasn't going to be the discourse of a child that I had in Māori Boy. And then you write all day, don't we? We write all day for 3 years, and we hope to get a first draft out of that. And, you know, I mean, you can kiss a normal life goodbye, folks. You just don't have a normal life. You bad eating, look at me. I mean, I used to be skinny once upon a time. Bad eating, stressed out and not sleeping. My dream world completely shot to bits. Out of whack to friends, you know. Nothing worse than having a writer. You never want to invite a writer to dinner when they're writing, because either they fall asleep or they're uninteresting or they've got nothing to say, and all they want to do is to go back home and crawl under the blankets, you know. But there was an architect friend of mine, and his name is Douglas Cardinal, and Douglas said to me, well, you know, when you even have the idea of writing, somehow or another it's already existing in the future. So I found great comfort in that. I found great comfort in the fact that because the book already exists, all I need to do is have the stamina to write towards it. And as my father used to say, it beats digging in fence posts.
You mentioned to me, Witi, recently that you thought you'd dealt with the traumatic event of your childhood in Māori Boy, and yet you found yourself staring it down again when you were writing this book. Fiona Kidman in the novel's epigraph says, of all the genre, memoir leads us down more unexpected paths than any other. We think we now know ourselves, but do we really? And I understand that you didn't expect actually to be dealing again with the memory of this thing that happened to you. Tell me how you rallied the strength to be back in that space again as you started writing this book.
Well, the issue about writing memoir is, and the way that I approached it was that I wanted to make sure that I was writing in the moment and in the spontaneity of the moment. And some people have asked me, well, you know, how can you remember all of the detail that you deploy in dealing with all of this? And I liked what Janet Frame had to say when she wrote her 3-book autobiography, and she was asked about her phenomenal memory, because she did have a phenomenal memory, and she said something like, it is in some things, yes, but, and I'm not particularly observant, but when I am writing, I have a clear observation of particulars I never knew I noticed. And so it wasn't the book that I wanted to write about. It wasn't the book I even set out to write about. Māori Boy was not the book I set out to write about. But the mere act of taking up the pen and then allowing what Māori and Pacifica people call the wā, which is this huge energy that comes out of te kore, the void, and then comes from te kore, the void, into te pō, the night, and then from te pō into te ao. All of that kind of energy poured into me, and I became then the recipient of these voices which kept saying, there are these other stories that you have that nobody ever knows. So I guess it's the difference between being a writer of one's life, where you write just one book, or if you then decide to go deep. And you know, I mean, my books are so big, I mean, they look like door stoppers, and so I think that they should be sold in one of the hardware stores like others. But when you decide to do it over 3 books, then that forces you to go deep. And so, although I thought I could deal simply with the outcome and the way in which the childhood rape consequently evolved, and I thought I could leave that just in that book. In the end, I realised that I couldn't, that it was something that had a profound effect on my life, and in fact it still does, because I didn't want to remember it. I honestly didn't want to go there. I didn't want to think about what one does. I didn't want to, because I'd forgotten it until I was 73, when Harriet said, well, you know, would you like to write your memoir? And until then, what I had done was conveniently put that boy on the cover. I'd locked him up in a little house in a beautiful valley with sun shining. I told him, I'm sorry, I can't deal with you in my life. I just have to leave you here and go away and look after myself, because... And so I left him in that valley, and I left him with that river and that stream with all of his stories and with his childhood. And I never did come back to him until 3 years ago with Māori Boy. But even now, since the book's been published, I keep on going around the house thinking, that really didn't happen to me. It's not me. It's almost as if I refuse to believe it. And the awful thing is that I owe him an apology. I owe him a huge debt of honour to him, because if I hadn't put him there, then maybe he would have been with me. And then if he had been with me, then I would have been a better person. But instead, I left him there. So this is my way of making him right, of putting him in his right place, of putting him beside me and showing how glorious he was. So
I think that's one of the most beautiful passages of the book, when you return to him. Perhaps we could hear... Are you ready to read again now, or shall we have another?
Sure. Well, okay. And I apologise to you. I'm trying to convey how much my life was zigging and zagging between school, family, church, and my closest friend, Jackson. Spinning off its axis, it plunged into the perilous. My stress levels started going up and into the red, and there came that moment in my life when, fueled by self-loathing, I had to find a way to obtain release. Thank God drugs were hard to get in Gisborne. After all, this was still the early 1960s. Instead, Jackson showed me how to use a razor. But I'm not blaming Jackson. Small, silver-edged, sharp, a razor was such a beautiful thing. It sliced, opened, just a little pain, but it gave the sense of punishment I so desired. I hadn't even heard of self-harm. Did it exist in those days? All I know is that really Jackson and I started to do it for laughs. Giggling, he demonstrated by cutting himself. Nothing to it, he said. I watched him, the orgasmic joy on his face. I wasn't the only one with demons. And then I tried it myself and found, after the sting of the blade, that it was comforting. It felt so good, so very, very good to hurt myself. And I knew I deserved it. I really did deserve it. I deserved it. I really did. I deserved it. You'll forgive the lack of detail, as I have spent many years trying to forget this part of my life. But whenever I succumbed to the slicing of my skin, there was first of all the pain, and then a huge rush of elation, and chasing quickly after it, however, was depression and the need to cut again. And sometimes Jackson would cut me and I would cut him. Your turn now. It was would come when he had control of the razor, and surprising ourselves, we would laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. But afterwards, always the depression, the darkness would return, and the blood pound in my temples. And I would think, I can't escape, I can't escape, I can't escape, I can't. Maybe the universe is determinate after all. It's determinate. After all, there's nothing I can do about this. I can't escape. The razor's cut was also an act of bloodletting. Panicking, I went through a period where I thought my rapist's spermatozoa, like a virus, was moving around inside me, eating up my universe being eaten up, extinguishing the nebulae of my life. If I sliced my chest, my thighs, my arms, I might get rid of myself, of them. Too late. Stars began to fall from the sky. There came an evening when the spores reached my dreams and struck. And a dawn blossomed around me. And I heard chanting in the dark, chanting in the dark, chanting. I found myself in a lambic zone of myth and surreality, the Māori world of Moimoia. And the dream was interlaced with the symbols and signs of our darker myths. A maelstrom of activity burst around me, terrorizing and alarming, and I was at the centre of it. And I knew this dream. I'd been to this place once before. My nights were times when my dreams often became nightmares, and the worst ones came from the Māori world of Moimoia. And the sky was blood red, and I was standing at the edge of a tall cliff. The wall was sheer black, and 1,000 miles below, the sea of dreams was swirling, opalescent and luminous. An errant draught caught me, and I began tumbling over and over and over and over and over and over and over, down, 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 and disoriented. I saw the surface of the sea rushing up at me, and then above and around, I saw the Ponaturi, nightmare creatures coming out of the blood-red sun. They were half men, half avian, winged Ponaturi with clawed hands and wings jagged as a bat's. And quickly I forced myself awake, reached for the razor and sliced my chest. See, that didn't hurt at all, did it, Witty? That didn't hurt, just a little slice, that didn't hurt at all. The slice of the blade, the astonishment at the relief, the sharp pain brought, the beauty of blood, the bloodletting, the liquid redness, the glow before the blood dried. It is so beautiful, that glow. How it rusted over, lost glamour. The desire to cut again, so good. So good, come out, come out, come out. And then in a dazed moment, disoriented, I saw something perched on my bed, looking at me, looking at me. It was looking at me. And I cried out in fear. Hello, Witty, the Ponaturi said.
Ask everyone also to give a clap to Kingsley.